The porcelain teacup shattered against the wooden floor of the Austin, Texas general store, sending shards skittering across the planks like scattered dreams. 42-year-old Catherine Brennan stood trembling with fury, her emerald eyes blazing at the silver-haired rancher who just made her the most outrageous proposition of her life. "Absolutely not, Fletcher Grayson," she hissed, clutching her shawl tight against her chest. "I will not marry a man old enough to be—" "I'm 48, not ancient," Fletcher interrupted, his weathered hand steady despite the storm brewing before him. His steel-gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And your father's debts don't disappear just because you're too proud to accept help." Catherine's cheeks flushed crimson. The autumn of 1869 had been cruel to the Brennan family. Her father's failed cotton investments had left them drowning in obligations they couldn't honor. Fletcher Grayson owned half the grazing land between Austin and San Antonio, and he'd offered a solution that made her blood boil: marriage in exchange for absorbing her family's crushing debts. "You're too old for this kind of arrangement," she protested, her voice cracking with desperation, and something else she refused to name. "What could you possibly want with a widow like me?" Fletcher stepped closer, his boots clicking against the floor with deliberate purpose. The scent of leather and sage filled the space between them. "Maybe I'm tired of eating cold suppers alone. Maybe I see a woman with fire in her spirit who deserves better than watching her family lose everything." His calloused hand reached out, hovering near her face but not touching, waiting for permission that terrified her to give. "1 month," he said quietly. "Come to my ranch. If you still think I'm too old for this after 30 days, I'll pay your debts anyway, and you'll never see me again." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. Outside, the Texas sun beat down mercilessly. But inside this cramped store, she felt the walls closing in with possibility and danger. "Before we move on, take a break with me, Joe. Pour yourself a warm cup of tea, settle in, and tell me what time it is, where you are listening from, and if you are enjoying this story so far. Consider subscribing. It helps more than you know." What she didn't know was that accepting his challenge would lead her down a path that would change everything she thought she knew about love, age, and the wild beating of a heart she'd thought long dead. The stagecoach rattled across the dusty Texas plains as Catherine clutched her carpet bag, second-guessing every decision that had brought her to this moment. Beside her, Fletcher sat quietly, his profile strong against the window as he watched the landscape roll past. 3 days had passed since that confrontation in the store, and she'd surprised herself by accepting his challenge. "Having regrets already?" Fletcher asked without turning, a hint of amusement in his deep voice. "Plenty," Catherine admitted, then caught herself. Honesty's refreshing," he said, finally looking at her. Crow's feet crinkled at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, and she found herself noticing how those lines seemed to add character rather than diminish it. "Most women your age would simper and pretend." "I'm done with pretending," Catherine said firmly. "My first marriage taught me that much. Robert wanted a decorative wife who'd smile silently while he gambled away our future." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "I'm not Robert." "No," she agreed, studying him carefully. "You're not. But you're still old enough to remember the Alamo firsthand." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the coach. "I'm not quite that ancient, though my back sometimes disagrees. I was barely 10 when that happened." The stagecoach hit a deep rut, throwing Catherine against Fletcher's solid shoulder. His arm instinctively wrapped around her to steady her, and for a moment she felt the surprising strength in his frame. This wasn't the feeble old man she'd tried to convince herself she was settling for. "Your ranch," she said, pulling away and straightening her bonnet to cover her confusion. "Tell me about it." Fletcher's expression softened. 3,000 acres of the most beautiful land God ever created. Hills that roll like ocean waves, live oaks that have stood for centuries, and a creek that runs clear even in August. Built the house myself 20 years ago, thinking I'd fill it with children and laughter. "What happened?" Catherine asked before she could stop herself. "Life happened," he said simply. "Lost my first wife to fever before we could start that family. Threw myself into building the ranch instead of building a future. Now I've got more land than I know what to do with, and a house that echoes when I walk through it." Catherine felt something shift in her chest, recognition of a kindred loneliness she hadn't expected to find. "I'm scared, Fletcher," she admitted in a whisper. "Good," he replied, his gray eyes holding hers. "I'm terrified. That means this matters." The stagecoach crested a hill, and suddenly Catherine saw it. Fletcher's ranch, spreading across the valley below, like a promise written in grass and sky. The ranch house took Catherine's breath away. It wasn't the grand plantation manor she'd imagined. It was better. Built from native limestone and dark wood, it seemed to grow naturally from the land itself, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides, and windows that caught the afternoon light like amber. "It's beautiful," she breathed, stepping down from the stagecoach before Fletcher could help her. She needed to feel her own feet on this ground, to claim this moment as her own choice. "Wait until you see the sunset from the back porch," Fletcher said, carrying her bags as if they weighed nothing. "Turns the whole sky purple and gold." An older Mexican woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her knowing smile suggested she'd been expecting this dramatic development in her employer's life. "Señora Catherine, welcome. I am Guadalupe, the housekeeper. Mr. Fletcher, he has been impossible these 3 days, cleaning and re-cleaning everything." "Guadalupe," Fletcher warned, his neck reddening slightly. Catherine bit back a smile. So the stoic rancher had been nervous too. The thought pleased her more than it should have. "I've prepared the guest room," Guadalupe continued, her eyes twinkling, "with the best linens and the view of the rose garden. Very proper, very respectable." "Thank you," Catherine said, grateful for the woman's intuitive understanding of the situation's delicacy. Fletcher set down her bags in the spacious front hall. "I should warn you, the place needs a woman's touch. I'm good with cattle and horses, less good with curtains and such." Catherine walked slowly through the first floor, her fingers trailing along the solid furniture, the stone fireplace that dominated one wall, the kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and herbs. Everything was clean but sparse, functional but lonely. "You're too old for this kind of bachelor existence," she said, turning to find Fletcher watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "A man your age should have learned to make a proper home by now." "Maybe I was waiting for the right teacher," he replied softly. The air between them crackled with possibility. Catherine felt her pulse quicken. This was dangerous territory. She'd come here as a business arrangement, a practical solution to an impossible problem. She hadn't expected to find her breath catching when he looked at her like that. "Show me the land," she said abruptly, needing distance and air. "If I'm to spend a month here, I should understand what you've built." Fletcher's smile was slow and devastating. "Get changed into something practical. We ride in 15 minutes. As Catherine climbed the stairs to her room, she wondered what she'd gotten herself into, and why her heart was racing with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. Catherine hadn't ridden a horse in 5 years, and her nervousness must have shown as she approached the beautiful chestnut mare Fletcher had saddled for her. "This is Juniper," Fletcher said, stroking the horse's neck with a gentleness that surprised Catherine. 16 years old, steady as sunrise, and patient with riders who might be rusty. "Are you calling me old too?" Catherine asked, then caught the playful challenge in her own voice. When had she started teasing him? "Just honest," Fletcher replied, his eyes crinkling. "Takes one to know one, I suppose." He helped her mount, his hands proper, but lingering a moment longer than necessary at her waist. Catherine settled into the saddle, muscle memory returning as she adjusted her seat and gathered the reins. "Good," Fletcher approved, mounting his own horse, a powerful bay gelding that danced sideways with barely contained energy. "You've done this before." "My father raised horses before the war," Catherine said. "Before everything changed." They rode out across the ranch, Fletcher pointing out landmarks and boundaries. The afternoon sun painted everything golden, and Catherine found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride. The land was indeed beautiful. Rolling hills dotted with cattle, stands of ancient oaks, and wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in purple and yellow. "You run this all yourself?" Catherine asked, as they paused at a high point overlooking the property. "I have ranch hands, good men who've been with me for years. But I know every acre, every fence line, every place where the creek runs deepest," Fletcher said. There was pride in his voice, but no arrogance. "This land and we've taken care of each other." "It must be lonely," Catherine said quietly. Fletcher turned in his saddle to face her fully. "It has been. That's why I made you that offer, Catherine. Not because I need a housekeeper or someone to cook my meals. Guadalupe does that fine. I need someone to share this with, someone who understands that building something means more than just accumulating acres." "And you think I'm that person?" Catherine asked, her throat tight. "A woman you barely know?" "I know you're strong enough to face ruin with your head high," Fletcher said. "I know you're honest enough to call me old to my face. I know you loved your family enough to consider marrying a stranger to save them. That's more than most people reveal in a lifetime of acquaintance." Catherine's mare shifted beneath her, and suddenly the horse's footing slipped on loose rock. Catherine gasped, gripping the reins as Juniper stumbled. Fletcher's arm shot out, steadying both horse and rider with reflexes that belied his age. His hand closed over Catherine's on the reins, his other arm circling her waist from his own mount. "I've got you," he said firmly. For a moment, Catherine let herself lean into that strength, feeling the solid warmth of him, the unexpected security of his embrace. Her heart pounded, from the scare, she told herself, not from his nearness. "See?" she managed breathlessly. "Too old for heroics." "Too stubborn to stop trying," Fletcher corrected, releasing her only when he was certain she was steady. but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her wonder what they were really talking about. That evening, dark clouds rolled in from the west, turning the sunset Fletcher had promised into an ominous purple-black wall. Catherine stood on the back porch, watching lightning fork across the distant hills as wind whipped her skirts and pulled her hair from its pins. "Storm's coming fast," Fletcher said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "Texas weather doesn't ease into anything." Catherine accepted the cup, grateful for its warmth as the temperature dropped. "I'd forgotten how dramatic the sky could be out here. In the city, buildings block half the view." "That's why I could never leave," Fletcher said, leaning against the porch rail. Thunder rumbled, closer now, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. "A man can think clearly under a sky this big." "And what do you think about?" Catherine asked, before she could stop herself. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, watching the storm roll closer. "Lately? Whether I'm foolish to hope that a beautiful, sharp-tongued woman might actually stay the full month. Whether I'm too old to start over, or whether starting over is exactly what a man my age needs." Before we continue, take a moment to hit that subscribe button if you're invested in Catherine and Fletcher's story. Don't forget to like this video and comment below telling us where you're watching from. We have viewers from all over the world enjoying these romantic tales. Now, back to the storm. The rain came in earnest then, sheeting across the porch in wind-driven waves. Fletcher grabbed Catherine's hand and pulled her toward the door, but she resisted, turning her face up to the rain instead. "When I was a girl, I used to dance in storms," Catherine said, her voice barely audible above the downpour. "My mother said it was unladylike, but I felt so alive." "Then dance," Fletcher said simply. Catherine looked at him, water streaming down her face. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm 42 years old." "A respectable widow." "You're also someone who said she was done pretending," Fletcher interrupted. He set down both coffee cups and held out his hand. "Dance with me, Catherine." "Fletcher, we're too old for—" But he was already pulling her out into the rain, onto the grass beyond the porch. His hand found her waist, and before Catherine could protest further, they were moving. Not a formal dance, but something wild and improvised that matched the storm's energy. Catherine laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. The sound burst from her chest like it had been caged there, waiting for permission to escape. Fletcher spun her under his arm, and she felt something crack open inside her. Something she'd thought had died with her youth. "You're crazy!" she shouted over the thunder. "Maybe," Fletcher shouted back, his grin visible even through the driving rain. "But tell me you don't feel alive right now." She couldn't tell him that because it was the absolute truth. She felt more alive in this moment, drenched and dancing with a man she barely knew, than she had in the last 10 years of her carefully controlled life. Lightning flashed, illuminating Fletcher's face, his wet hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes bright with something between joy and challenge. He looked, Catherine realized with a start, utterly magnificent. "Too old for this, am I?" he murmured, pulling her closer as the rain slowed to a gentle patter. Catherine's breath caught. Their faces were inches apart, and she could feel the heat of him even through their soaked clothing. "Maybe," she whispered. "I was wrong about that." Catherine woke to sunshine streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting realization that she'd slept better than she had in years. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and green. She dressed quickly, her body pleasantly sore from yesterday's ride and their wild dance in the rain. Downstairs she found Fletcher already at the kitchen table, papers spread before him as he worked through ranch accounts. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was warmer than the morning sun. "Coffee's fresh," he said. "Guadalupe left breakfast in the warming oven. She's visiting her sister today, so it's just us." "Just us," Catherine echoed, feeling suddenly shy. In the bright morning light, last night's abandon seemed both thrilling and dangerous. She poured coffee and sat across from him, studying the neat columns of figures. "You keep good records." "Can't run a ranch on guesswork," Fletcher said. "Every cow, every expense, every profit needs tracking." He paused, then pushed a ledger toward her. "I'd like your opinion on something." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "My opinion? Fletcher, I don't know anything about cattle ranching." "But you know about numbers. Your father taught you bookkeeping, didn't he? Before he made those bad investments?" Catherine stiffened. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with," Fletcher said gently. "Not to judge, Catherine. To understand. Your father trusted the wrong people with his money. That doesn't mean you inherited his weakness for risky ventures. In fact, I'm betting you learned from his mistakes." Catherine looked at the ledger, seeing immediately that Fletcher was considering an expansion, buying additional breeding stock that would require significant capital but could double his herd quality within 3 years. "It's sound," she said slowly, running her finger down the projections. "Ambitious, but sound. The risk is calculated, and you've built in contingencies for drought or disease." "That's what I thought," Fletcher said, satisfaction in his voice. "But I wanted someone else's eyes on it. Someone who wouldn't just tell me what I wanted to hear." "And you thought I'd be honest enough for that?" Catherine asked. "I know you are," Fletcher replied. "You haven't pulled a single punch since we met." They worked through the morning together, Catherine finding herself drawn into the puzzle of ranch economics. Fletcher listened to her suggestions, really listened, treating her insights with respect rather than condescension. It was intoxicating in a way Catherine hadn't expected, this meeting of minds, this partnership of equals. "You're good at this," Fletcher said during a break for lunch. "Better than good. You see patterns I miss." "I had to be," Catherine said quietly. "After Robert died, and I realized what he'd done to our finances, I taught myself everything I could about money management. Too late to save my own situation, but not too late to help my parents." Fletcher reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "It's not too late for anything, Catherine. That's what I'm trying to show you. We're not too old to start fresh, to build something new, to take chances we thought were behind us." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being truly seen. "You barely know me, Fletcher. How can you have such faith?" "Because I recognize you," he said simply. "Like calling to like. We're both people who've been knocked down and got back up. We're both stronger than the world gave us credit for. And we're both tired of being alone." The afternoon stretched before them, full of possibility. Catherine realized with a start that she wasn't counting down the days until she could leave. She was, impossibly, beginning to hope. The following morning brought an unexpected test of Fletcher's claims about his vitality. Catherine woke to the sound of raised voices and hurried downstairs to find Fletcher in heated discussion with his foreman, a weathered man named Diego. "Mr. Fletcher, you cannot go. It's too dangerous for a man your—" Diego caught sight of Catherine and stopped abruptly. "Dangerous how?" Catherine asked. Fletcher's jaw was set in a stubborn line she was beginning to recognize. "Nothing to concern yourself with. Cattle have broken through a fence in the north pasture and scattered into rough country. We need to round them up before nightfall, or we'll lose them to predators. Diego thinks I should send the younger hands and stay here," Fletcher added, his tone making clear what he thought of that suggestion. "Because the terrain is treacherous," Diego protested. "Steep ravines, loose rock. Even the best rider—" "Has been riding that land for 20 years, Fletcher finished firmly. He turned to Catherine. "I won't apologize for doing my job. This ranch doesn't run itself." Catherine saw something in his eyes, a flash of defensiveness, maybe even fear that she'd agree with Diego, that she'd see this as proof he was too old for the life he'd built. The realization made her straighten her spine. "Then I'm coming with you," she announced. Both men stared at her. "Catherine," Fletcher began. "You said you needed someone to share this with," Catherine interrupted. "Not someone to wait at home wringing her hands. If you're going to risk your neck herding cattle, I'm going to see what that actually means." Fletcher's expression shifted through surprise, concern, and finally landed on something like admiration. "It'll be hard riding. Dangerous." "Then you'd better keep me safe," Catherine said, meeting his eyes steadily. "Unless you think I'm too old and delicate for it." A slow smile spread across Fletcher's face. "Diego, saddle Juniper for Mrs. Catherine, and add an extra canteen to her kit." The ride north was indeed challenging. They climbed into hill country where the landscape turned rocky and the trail narrowed to barely more than a game path. Catherine's legs ached and her hands grew sore from gripping the reins, but she refused to complain. Beside her, Fletcher moved with the easy confidence of a man completely in his element. "There," he said finally, pointing to a cluster of cattle visible in a small box canyon. "They've trapped themselves. We need to guide them back through that gap carefully, or they'll panic and scatter worse." What followed was hours of careful, exhausting work. Fletcher directed the hands with quiet authority, positioning riders to create a living funnel that would guide the cattle to safety. Catherine watched him, really watched him, seeing not an old man trying to prove something, but a capable rancher at the height of his skill. When one steer broke from the group and charged toward a dangerous ravine, Fletcher didn't hesitate. He spurred his horse forward, cutting off the animal's path with perfect timing, turning it back toward the group. The move required split-second judgment and physical courage that made Catherine's heart leap into her throat. "Show off," she muttered when he returned to her side, though she was grinning. "Just doing what needed doing," Fletcher replied, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. "You holding up?" "I'm not the one who just risked breaking his neck," Catherine pointed out. "True," Fletcher agreed, "but you're the one who climbed up here to watch me do it. That took a different kind of courage." As the sun began to set, they finally drove the last of the cattle back through the fence, which the hands immediately set about repairing. Catherine slumped in her saddle, exhausted but exhilarated. "Still think I'm too old for this?" Fletcher asked quietly as they headed back toward the ranch house. Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who just spent 8 hours in the saddle doing dangerous work without complaint, at the rancher who commanded respect from younger men through competence, not bluster. at the person who'd invited her to see him at his most vulnerable and most capable. "No," she said softly. "I think I'm the fool for ever saying it." That evening, Catherine soaked in a hot bath while her muscles screamed their protest. She'd ridden more in 2 days than she had in 5 years, and her body was making its displeasure known. But beneath the ache was satisfaction. She'd kept up, proven something to Fletcher and to herself. When she finally made her way downstairs, she found Fletcher on the back porch he'd promised would show her the best sunsets. He wasn't wrong. The sky blazed purple and gold, exactly as he'd described, painting the rolling hills in shades of amber and violet. "Thought you might have fallen asleep in the bath," Fletcher said, handing her a glass of wine as she settled into the chair beside him. "Considered it," Catherine admitted. "I'm going to feel every minute of today tomorrow." "Same," Fletcher said ruefully. "Don't tell Diego, but I'm already stiff as a board." Catherine laughed. "Your secret's safe with me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors shift and change. Catherine found herself studying Fletcher's profile in the fading light, wondering when exactly she'd stopped seeing him as a desperate solution to her problems and started seeing him as... what? A friend? A partner? Something more? "Why me, Fletcher?" she asked suddenly. "Really, you could have chosen any woman in Austin, younger, prettier, without my family's baggage." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. 10 years ago, I watched you at the Harvest Festival in town. You were with your husband, and even from across the square I could see you were unhappy. Not in an obvious way. You smiled at all the right moments, said all the proper things, but your eyes were somewhere else, somewhere far away. I thought to myself, there's a woman who's learned to make the best of disappointment. Catherine's breath caught. "You noticed me that long ago?" "I did," Fletcher admitted. "And then last year, I saw you at your husband's funeral. Everyone else was performing grief, but you stood there with this expression of quiet relief mixed with guilt for feeling relieved. I recognized that look, Catherine. I'd worn it myself once." "When your wife died?" Catherine asked gently. Fletcher shook his head. "My first wife and I married young and foolish. We weren't unhappy exactly, but we weren't truly happy either. When she passed, I grieved the loss of possibility more than the loss of what we actually had. It took me years to forgive myself for not mourning her the way I thought I should." "So you saw a fellow fraud," Catherine said, understanding. "No," Fletcher said firmly, turning to face her. "I saw a fellow survivor. Someone strong enough to endure a difficult marriage without becoming bitter. Someone honest enough not to rewrite history into something prettier than it was. When I heard about your father's debts and your family situation, I thought, here's my chance. Not to rescue you, Catherine, to offer you the same thing you could offer me." "What's that?" Catherine whispered. "A second chance to get it right," Fletcher said. "A partnership built on truth instead of illusions. Companionship between equals who've both learned the hard way what matters and what doesn't." Catherine felt tears spill over. "I thought I was past the age for romance." "This isn't romance," Fletcher said softly, reaching out to wipe away her tears with his thumb. "Romance is for the young and foolish. This is something better. It's recognition. It's two people who've earned the right to be honest, looking at each other and saying, yes, You. I choose you, scars and all." "I'm still scared," Catherine admitted. "Good," Fletcher said again, just as he had in the stagecoach. "Because I'm about to do something terrifying." He stood and pulled Catherine to her feet, his hands gentle but certain at her waist. The sunset painted them both in gold as he looked down at her with an expression that made her heart race. "Catherine Brennan," he said quietly, "I know we agreed to a month, but I need you to know right now, here in our second week together, that I'm already certain. You're not too young, not too old, not too anything except exactly right. And when this month is over, I'm going to ask you to stay, not because of debts or obligations, but because life is too short and I've already wasted too much time being alone." Catherine couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she did what she'd been wanting to do since their dance in the rain. She raised up on her toes and kissed him. Fletcher made a sound of surprised pleasure, his arms tightening around her as he returned the kiss with an intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. It wasn't the awkward, tentative kiss of uncertain youth. It was the kiss of two people who knew exactly what they wanted and had finally found the courage to reach for it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Too old for this?" he murmured, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "Never," Catherine breathed. "Never again." The remaining days of Catherine's month flew past in a blur of discoveries. She and Fletcher fell into an easy rhythm, working together on ranch accounts in the mornings, riding the property in the afternoons, talking for hours each evening about everything and nothing. Fletcher taught her about cattle bloodlines and grass management. Catherine reorganized his chaotic filing system and found ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality. But more than that, they learned each other. Catherine discovered that Fletcher sang old trail songs while he worked, that he had a weakness for lemon cake, that he read poetry by lamplight when he thought no one was watching. Fletcher learned that Catherine was fierce at chess, that she could calm the most fractious horse with her voice, that she hadn't let herself laugh freely in so long she'd almost forgotten how. They kissed often now, stolen moments in the barn, lingering embraces in the kitchen, passionate interludes on the porch after dark. But Fletcher never pushed for more, honoring the unspoken boundary they'd established. Catherine appreciated his restraint, even as it frustrated her. She was falling for this man, falling hard, and the intensity of it terrified her. "You've been quiet today," Fletcher observed as they rode back from checking on a pregnant mare. Only 3 days remained in Catherine's agreed-upon month, and the deadline loomed between them like an invisible wall. "Thinking," Catherine admitted. "About staying or leaving?" Catherine pulled Juniper to a stop at their favorite overlook. From here you could see the entire ranch spread out like a patchwork quilt of green and gold. "Both? Neither? Fletcher, I'm 42 years old. If I do this, if I stay, if I marry you, I want it to be forever. I don't have time for mistakes anymore." "Neither do I," Fletcher said, moving his horse alongside hers. "That's why I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith, Catherine. I'm asking you to make an informed decision based on what you've learned these past weeks. Have I been anything less than honest with you?" "No," Catherine admitted. "Have I made demands you couldn't meet? Expected you to be something you're not?" "No," she said again. "Then what's really holding you back?" Fletcher asked gently. Catherine struggled to put her fear into words.
What if I'm not enough? You've built this incredible life, this place that runs like clockwork. What if I disrupt it? What if you wake up 6 months from now and realize you liked your solitude better than my company?
We're almost at the end of Catherine and Fletcher's story. If you've been moved by their journey, please take a second to like this video and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from, and tell us, do you believe in second chances at love? Now, let's see what Catherine decides. Fletcher dismounted and came to help Catherine down, his hands sure at her waist. But instead of setting her on her feet, he held her suspended for a moment, eye to eye. You want to know what I've realized these past weeks, he said. That my life wasn't clockwork. It was empty routine. You didn't disrupt it, Catherine. You made it make sense. Every meal tastes better with you across the table. Every sunset is brighter with you beside me. Every challenge is easier because I can turn to you and see a partner who understands.
Fletcher.
I'm too old to play games, he continued, setting her gently on the ground but keeping his hands at her waist. I'm too old to pretend I don't know my own heart. I love you, Catherine Brennan. Not in spite of your age or your past or your sharp tongue. Because of all those things. You're exactly what I needed and didn't know enough to ask for. Catherine felt something break open in her chest, the last wall she'd built around her heart crumbling to dust.
I love you too, she whispered. God help me, I do.
I didn't want to, didn't mean to, but somehow you got past every defense I'd built. So stay, Fletcher said simply. Not for a month or a year, but for whatever time we have left. We're not too old to start over, Catherine. We're the perfect age. Old enough to know what matters, young enough to enjoy it. Catherine looked at him, really looked at him. At the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes, at the strength in his shoulders and the tenderness in his touch, at the man who'd seen past her defenses to the woman beneath and had chosen her anyway.
Yes,
she said, the word feeling like freedom.
Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it.
Fletcher's answering smile was brilliant as the Texas sun. He swept her up into his arms, spinning her around despite their combined ages, despite the proper behavior expected of middle-aged people. Catherine laughed, throwing her head back to the sky, feeling young and old and exactly right all at once. When he set her down, they kissed again. A kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities, like second chances and hard-won wisdom. Catherine finally understood what Fletcher had been trying to show her all along. They weren't too old for passion or adventure or new beginnings. They were perfectly aged, seasoned by experience, strengthened by survival, ready to build something lasting and true. 6 weeks later. The wedding had been simple, just Diego, Guadalupe, and a few close friends gathering at the ranch on a perfect October afternoon. Catherine wore a simple cream dress, Fletcher his best suit, and they'd exchanged vows under the ancient oak tree that had sheltered the property for generations. Now, as the guests departed and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Fletcher took Catherine's hand and led her toward the house that was finally, truly theirs. "Mrs. Grayson," he said, testing out her new name with a satisfied smile.
Mr. Grayson,
Catherine replied, her heart full to bursting. They'd spent the morning celebrating with friends, but the afternoon stretched before them, private, precious, theirs alone. Fletcher pulled Catherine close on the porch, his hands gentle but possessive at her waist. "You know," he murmured against her ear, "we have the whole afternoon ahead of us. No one to interrupt, nowhere we need to be." Catherine felt heat flood her cheeks. They'd been proper during their courtship, despite the intensity of their feelings. But they were married now, and the desire she'd been carefully banking blazed to life.
"I suppose,"
she said, trying for lightness, but hearing the breathiness in her own voice,
"we could review those quarterly reports."
Fletcher laughed, low and intimate. "Or we could finally stop being quite so proper." He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, until her knees went weak. "Unless you think we're too old for—"
"Don't you dare finish that sentence,"
Catherine said fiercely, grabbing his lapels.
"Don't you dare."
Fletcher swept her up into his arms and carried her through the door. Catherine clung to his shoulders, amazed at his strength.
"Your back,"
she started. "Is fine," Fletcher assured her, his eyes dark with promise. "Better than fine. Catherine, I have been waiting weeks to show you exactly how not too old I am." The afternoon passed in a blur of tender passion and joyful discovery. They learned each other with the patience of people who knew that love didn't have to be rushed to be real. Fletcher proved quite thoroughly that age had nothing to do with desire or capability. Catherine discovered that everything she'd thought she knew about passion had been merely a pale preview of what was possible with the right person. Later, as golden light filtered through the curtains and they lay tangled together, Catherine traced patterns on Fletcher's chest.
"Still think I'm too old for this?"
Fletcher murmured, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. Catherine laughed, rich with contentment. "I think you've more than proven your point, Mr. Grayson." "Good," Fletcher said, pulling her closer. "Because I plan to keep proving it, daily." Catherine looked at him, her husband, her partner, her unexpected second chance, and felt nothing but certainty.
"Do you have any regrets? About pursuing me? About this arrangement?"
Fletcher cupped her face tenderly. "Not a single one. You were right when you said we needed to get this right. We don't have time for mistakes. But Catherine, this isn't a mistake. This is exactly what we were both meant to find."
"I love you,"
Catherine whispered. "I love you too," Fletcher replied. "And we have the rest of our lives to prove it to each other." As evening fell over the ranch, Catherine realized that she'd been wrong about so many things. Wrong about being too old for passion, wrong about second chances, wrong about Fletcher. But most importantly, she'd been gloriously wrong about thinking her best years were behind her. They were only just beginning. If you enjoyed Catherine and Fletcher's journey from skepticism to passionate love, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you believe in second